Hello and welcome to the College Football Breakdown Show. Yonkers here, ready to go over Week 14 DFS picks for Saturday, December 5th. Was off last week a little bit. I made a preview video for the Friday slate, wasn't able to do the Saturday slate. I started fiddling around with college basketball a little bit. Hope you saw my college basketball video for the tip-off last week. I'm not sure how much time I'm going to have to make those videos. I'm still playing around with the models and whatnot. So we'll see going forward. I mean, right now, I have a full-time job. I have a job coaching after work, and then this is pretty much my third job. So I'm not sure how much I'll be able to get out on a continuous basis, but I definitely make sure I try to get these videos out once a week. So anyway, if I don't get back to you on a weeknight, if you ask me on Twitter or anything, at YonkersCFB, it's because I stay very busy. Anyway, we have a 14-game slate, I believe. It was 15, and we lost the Coastal Carolina game since they're now playing BYU. Great game, but not on our DraftKings slate, so it's a very wonky slate, honestly. The pricing's pretty good. There's a lot of expensive players, and there's just a lot of variance anytime you have this many teams, so it probably won't be playing this slate absolutely crazy. I had a good week last week, so of course I'll be throwing some lineups in. If you're new, how I do this, I don't play 150 lineups. This information is meant to help you if you do play 150 lineups, regardless of what you play. I think you hopefully will find this information useful. I don't know if you will or not, but that's the goal. Anyway, this is brought to you by thebreakdownsports.com. Give us a look. We got everything going over there. College football, NFL, NBA offseason, horse racing picks, sometimes UFC content. I try to get that out as well, but like I said, a little busy. But yeah, we got everything you could possibly ask for over there. Okay, college basketball as well. Duh. So first game, Texas A&M versus Auburn. Let's get right to it. So Texas A&M on offense, they're averaging 5.3 yards per rush, very good rushing team, and 6.3 yards per play. So even though they sucked last week against LSU, they're still a good offense. And I don't want to say that too lightly because they really, really were bad against LSU, and LSU has a bad defense. So that was concerning. But on the whole, they've been a good offense this year. Auburn, on the whole, has not been a great defense. They're allowing 5.7 yards per play. And they're not very solid anywhere. This Auburn team in general just is very mediocre this year. So Kellen Mond, he was terrible. I played him last week against LSU, especially in the late slate, and 11 for 34. Just one of the worst performances I've ever seen. So I'm not sure how confident I could be here. Auburn, while I said they're not good, I think Texas A&M's a better football team. Weird things happen in Auburn's games. I wouldn't be that surprised if they did something crazy here. But anyway, not much ownership for me on this one. I think Weidermeyer is their top guy receiving. He's their tight end. He sees the most targets. He has the most touchdowns. Chase Lane's not really much of a threat. I'm not very interested in Chase Lane. Isaiah Spiller, like I said, 5.3 yards per rush is within consideration, not the most fantastic price point. Aina Smith sees about as many targets as Weidermeyer. They're their top two options. 5.5, that's a good price. If he was listed as a wide receiver, maybe, but I feel like they're better running backs that we'll talk about here. So, not crazy about them. Auburn, they are struggling, to say the least. They did lose all 5 offensive line starters going into the year, and they've had injuries now with the new guys, and now Bigsby's playing injured. Tank Bigsby. He has a hip injury. He did not look like himself last week. Similar injury status to what he had a week ago. So he'll probably play, but he's going to test it in pregame warm-ups, and really he was running very gingerly on it last week. So he's going up against a very good rush defense in Texas A&M. They allow only 87 yards per game at a 3.0 yards per carry clip. However, Texas A&M can be beat through the air. The question is, can Bo Nix be the guy to beat them through the air? The answer is usually no. Texas A&M is the number 4 pass defense in the SEC, so they're okay. But they can be beat. Schwartz has double digits in 10 straight games. Did I get that right? I don't think they played 10 games. I don't know. My notes are... Who knows what I was trying to say there. Anyway, Schwartz has been pretty consistent, but he really hasn't hit the big play. Surprisingly, with the wide receivers that they have, they only have 24 pass plays over 20 yards all season long, which is very surprising. Anthony Schwartz, fastest guy in college football. Seth Williams, well, they should have had 25, but he dropped that wide open one against Bama last week. Pretty bad. Had him in a few lineups. He does have double digits in 5 straight games up until last week. Maybe that was a little fluky because he was shadowed by Surtain, and like I said, he should have had a touchdown, but he dropped it. So those are the top 2 guys. I think either one of them are fine. I usually just lean towards the cheaper one, and I think that's Williams. I was leaning towards taking Texas A&M -7 in this game. Like I said, Auburn's not very good, but Auburn's been very, very, very good as a home dog. I was listening to Brad Powers on the drive home, actually, before I recorded this, and he kind of pointed out that how good Auburn is in the dog roll at home. So not much there for me. Okay, Texas versus Kansas State. When we're looking at Texas, they should be able to score the ball here against Kansas State. But the pricing's not great. I mean, Ellinger at 9.1, if you can get up there. All the quarterbacks are expensive, so Kansas State does not have a great defense. They allow 5.7 yards per play. They have a 99th ranked pass defense, allowing 266 yards per game, so I think that's where they're most vulnerable. If you are stacking him, which you don't have to because he has a lot of rushing upside, I still think Jake Smith is the top guy. He has target counts of 10, 7, and 6 over his last 3 games. Hasn't been overly consistent. I don't think he's passed 100 yards yet this year, which is not exactly something you would love to see, but I think he's their most reliable receiving threat. Other than that, Brendan Eagles has been pretty good. Had a monster game last week. 14, 14, and 22 over his last 3, so he's okay, but I don't necessarily love the targets he's getting. Joshua Moore has been extremely inconsistent at 4.7. Very touchdown reliant, it seems. My issue with Jake Smith is that Jordan Whittington sees some snaps out of the slot, and he's back. He saw 4 targets last week, only had 26 yards, but he's been looking pretty good when on the field. So that might cut into Smith a little bit. That's why I'm not going to have a ton of Smith, but I think my most known Texas player is probably going to be Smith. Bijan Robinson. So Keontae Ingram is out for this game. I think he might have transferred. I have to check that, but he's out. So it's Bijan Robinson's backfield. Roshan Johnson will see some touches at 4.1 as well. And Bijan Robinson's one of the most talented freshmen in all of college football. We have 2 very talented freshman running backs here with Deuce Vaughn on the other side. So he's fine, but his workload isn't fantastic. Be a shocker if he saw over 20 carries. I don't think any Texas back has this year. I could fact check that, but Ellinger's going to cut into his rushing upside. So he's okay. Everyone on Texas is okay. The prices seem right. The receivers are a little cheap, but kind of a mess in that room. As for Kansas State offensively, not really anything interesting here. They have some of the worst quarterback play I've seen at the Power 5 level this year between Will Howard and Nick Ast, so I'm not looking at them as a punt. They've been that bad. Not for me. Deuce Vaughn had 15 touches. Sees about 15 touches per game. He had 102 yards last game, which looks good, but he had only 106 in the 3 games prior combined. So after a hot start, he really has dropped off a cliff, but he is by far their clear number 1 option. This Texas defense is better than some people think, especially in the rush D. I kind of mentioned that last week when they played Breece Hall, and they actually were pretty good against Breece Hall. I think Breece Hall had his worst fantasy game of the year, or at least close to it, and he broke a few big runs, especially in the second half, but mostly he was pretty bottled up. Texas does not have a bad rush defense. Vaughn does see carry targets out of the backfield, though, so I think he's okay at 6.6. I guess I'd rather have Robinson in this game just because he's cheaper. Anyway, as far as the betting angles in this one, Texas is 0-6 against the spread in their last 6 in Manhattan. I don't trust Texas as a favorite. That's the usual shtick with them. Trust Tom Herman as a dog and not as a favorite. And I've been kind of following that the last couple of years. It's been really good to me. So I don't love Texas as a favorite here, but I've seriously considered betting them. They've been bet down to -7. I guess the worry is they've totally given up on the year. They have had a few key opt-outs, and that's keeping me from betting them. If it gets below 7, it's at 7 right now. If it's at 6.5, I might be forced to take them just because I think they're the way more talented team. I don't think Kansas State is very good at football, which, they're playing football. But Kansas State always pulls weird stuff. They always fight hard. They're well coached. Texas, I'm not sure we could say anything about them. They might be giving up on the year. So that's you know. Anyway, Texas is 3-13 against the spread in their last 16 games against Kansas State. Kansas State has lost 4 straight, however, by an average of 20 points. Like I said, they're just not a good football team. K-State's going to look to slow down the game in this one and keep it on the ground. So Deuce Vaughn should see more touches than usual. All right, Oklahoma State versus TCU. So this is the battle between the second and the third longest tenured coaches in the FBS. I thought that was kind of funny. Of course, Gary Patterson with TCU, he's been there since 2000, and then Mike Gundy's been with Oklahoma State since 2005. From a betting side, TCU is 9-24 against the spread in their last 33 home games, 6-14 against the spread in their last 20 games against a team with a winning record. So I kind of like Oklahoma State minus 1.5 here. I mean, TCU's been one of the worst teams in college football to bet on the last 5 years. They've been really poor against the spread with Gary Patterson and whatnot. They just haven't had great offenses, and they seem to be stalling out somewhat. There's not much interesting going on with that team. Oklahoma State, meanwhile, is still kind of holding out hopes for a Big 12 title. All right, as far as quarterback goes, Spencer Sanders, I think he's fine. I'll have some Spencer Sanders in a slate where there's a lot of expensive quarterbacks. I think Sanders has a good price at 6.8. He's had in his 3 of his last 4 games, he had 25 points, 33 points, and 24 points. But he had a dud in there. He's had a few injured games that are on his game log, which I think is driving down his price and driving down interest. He's left some of these games injured. He left the Oklahoma game injured, although he was terrible when he did play. So, and then he left the Tulsa game injured. He only saw 2 pass attempts. So, but he has had some duds. So I think he's interesting. As far as the wide receivers, obviously Tylan Wallace is the clear go-to guy. He has target counts of 14, 10, and 12 in his last 3 games. An absolute monster, 7.3. That's expensive, but honestly, he could be more expensive. 44 points, 10 points, and 29 points in his last 3 games. Don't hate that at all. I don't really think it's wise to play any receivers other than that. I've played Dylan Stoner a few times just because he's the secondary guy. As far as running backs go, TCU, their defense is pretty average, but they are better against the run. They only allow 3.9 yards per carry. I still would have interest in the running backs if I knew what the heck was going on. Obviously, L.D. Brown was a game-time decision, was doubtful. Chuba Hubbard was also a late no-go. I don't know if he was technically a scratch, but was out with injury, and the news came out late. So Desmond Jackson won me a couple $100 last week. Thank you, Desmond Jackson. So if we get news who's going to actually be the starter, I would play some of their running backs. If all 3 of these guys are playing, who the heck knows what's going on? I would assume, Chuba has to be the lead back if he's healthy, but that's a big if, and he's probably looking towards the NFL draft. I think, they're still playing for a Big 12 title, so maybe not, but with everybody opting out and him being injured and him supposing to be a somewhat high NFL draft, I think you want to keep an eye on that. So interest here, but absolutely no news as to who's actually going to play, and we might not get that until morning of, so buyer beware. Okay, TCU offense, not really something I'm interested in. However, they're playing an Oklahoma State team that looks like they had a really good defense at the start of the year, and then they've allowed more than 40 points in 3 of their last 4 games. Horned Frogs have scored 30-plus points 5 times already this year, so maybe they can score 30-plus here. I don't think it would surprise anybody that much. Oklahoma State is more beatable in the run game. They allow 162 rush yards per game at a 4.2 yards per carry clip. TCU has a pretty good run game, 198 yards per game on the ground, 4.9 yards per carry. The question is, where does it come from? Barlow and Evans both see carries in the backfield. I lean towards Evans. He's a 5-star. He had a nice truck stick. I haven't played Madden in a while. I think that's what they call it. Hit stick, but on offense. Last game, he has double digits in 3 of his last 5, but he had 2 duds thrown in there. He does not see a very safe workload at all, but he's very cheap at $4,000, and he has out-touched Barlow each of the last 2 games. Meanwhile, Max Duggan has 409 yards and 7 scores on the ground as well. So those 3 guys are going to kind of split it. So who knows who's going to see if they see their average of about 200 yards, maybe a little more. Who knows who's going to see it? So I don't trust Max Duggan. Had a very funny stat line last week. He had 3 pass attempts completed out of 11, but all 3 of those went for touchdowns against Kansas. That's kind of pathetic. I guess at least they all went for touchdowns, but you shouldn't play the wide receivers unless you're on something. If you are, all power to you, but I'm not currently. So anyway, Ohio State versus Michigan State. I took Ohio State minus, I forget what I got that, minus 23. If you haven't been paying attention to the news lately surrounding them, they aren't sure they're going to have enough games to make the Big Ten championship game because you have to meet a certain threshold. I believe it's 6 games. And basically, long story short, they're fighting to get into the playoff picture. And while they are a very good team, while they're one of the best teams in the country, they've had some okay games. They haven't looked fantastic in some of their games. So I really think they're going to blow out a bad Michigan State team here to make a point. I do not think they're going to let off the gas until it is wider than 23 points, that's for sure. So Justin Fields at 10,000, I mean, he's really expensive, but he's always fine. Garrett Wilson is the better wide receiver between him and Olave, in my opinion. Olave has 18 plus each game, which is great, but Wilson has 30 plus in each of his games. I believe that's in 4 games. However, Olave had 10 targets last game, which was the same as Wilson. I just think with the price difference, I'll probably end up playing more Olave. I think Wilson's probably the better play, but price adjusted, I go with Olave. Anyone under that than that does not see significant targets and is a dart throw. And I'm not really interested in throwing darts. And if I really need a dart, I'll look into it. But it's Thursday night. We're not quite looking at desperate darts yet. As far as the run game for Ohio State, I mean, they're fine. Everybody on Ohio State's fine. Master Teague, a little bit expensive for my blood, but he is definitely their lead back. Trey Sermon, however, does see carries. He sees about 10 carries per game. Again, he still hasn't really done much with them, but he's been somewhat effective. I mean, 6.7, 5.7, 4.3, 5 yards per carry. He's decent. He's on the field for a very good offense. He's going to find the red zone eventually. He's not going to finish with 0 touchdowns on the year. He might, but it would be very surprising. So against the bad Michigan State team here at 3.5, while I just said I don't know about any dart throws, I think he's better than a dart throw, but he's priced like a dart throw, so maybe. All right, as far as offense for Michigan State, not much you're going to want to do here. Lombardi has 2 touchdowns and 6 interceptions in his last 3 games. The Ohio State defense hasn't played great, and he's going to be playing from behind, so could he pay off his 5.1 price? Sure, he could. Basically, the story this week, there's so many good quarterbacks, and they're all expensive. You might have to play a cheap guy. I would prefer paying down to someone like Spencer Sanders at 6.8 than going all the way at the bottom of the barrel, because the bottom of the barrel is that way for a reason. As far as wide receivers, Naylor sees the most targets, so if you're playing one, play Naylor. He's cheap. And as far as the running back position, Hayward saw over 20 rushes last game. When Simmons was out, nobody knows that Simmons is going to play. Some of these other guys see carries, but they've done absolutely nothing. So at 4.6, I guess you could go to him, but they're going to be playing from behind, so don't love it. All right, Nebraska versus Purdue. Something's not really quite right with Purdue this year. I'm a fan of them. I think they have a pretty good offense, but something's kind of weird. Their play calling's kind of weird. It just seems like they should be a little better than they are. Meanwhile, Nebraska, we know something's wrong with them, but we already knew that for a while. It seems like some people didn't. They hype them up every year. But so 2 Big Ten teams who, I mean, the Big Ten, there's a lot of just meh teams. These are 2 of them, even though I kind of like Purdue. But anyway, Nebraska's offense, let's look at them. They should have success here if they run their quarterback. They are going against a Bob Diaco defense. Bob Diaco is Purdue's defensive coordinator. I am not a big Bob Diaco fan. I've called him the proponent of the Swiss cheese defense before. So they could have success here if they run the football. I would have interest in playing Adrian Martinez, who is back to being their quarterback. But Luke McCaffrey is still seeing snaps. He saw 18 snaps last week. So who knows? A little bit risky. I might play Martinez in like one lineup, maybe a game stack. I think it could be sneaky, but again, we don't know if he's even going to be on the field that much. Sounds like Mills is going to come back. Dedrick Mills. He leads the running back room with only 95 rushing yards this year, so that shows you how pathetic the run game has been. So at 5.1, maybe. That might eat into Wan'Dale Robinson's workload a little bit out of the backfield. Wan'Dale's seeing about 9 targets each game, and he gets a handful of carries as well. There are some within the CFF community who have like a butt love affair with Wan'Dale Robinson. kind of interesting. The Wan'Dale Robinson fetish. I really like watching him play football. I think he's a very fun football player, but I mean, he's really small. He's not your traditional wide receiver. He hasn't had over 100 yards at this game. I'm glad he's getting involved in the run game, and he's been somewhat productive. So he's a fine player, and he's playing a not great defense. But I don't really see why you'd play him at 6.9 instead of Rondale Moore at 6.8. Purdue has a good rush defense. They're only allowing 3.6 yards per rush allowed, but they do have the number 90 pass defense. So that's why I said, like, in Nebraska's offense, their quarterback should kind of be able to get some rushing yards no matter what, and then if they can throw the ball over the top, that'd be great, but that's a big if because they haven't thrown the ball at all. All right, as far as Purdue goes, they're facing a Nebraska team that has the 103rd rush defense, allowing 204 yards per game on the ground. But Purdue does not have a good rushing offense. They actually rank dead last in the conference at 98.2 rushing yards per game and only 133 carries on the year. So they really look to pass. Should they be able to run the ball decently here? They should. And Xander Horvath is kind of the workhorse, but you can see there 10 carries in 2 of his last 3, but he had the receiving work to make up for it. So I don't love Xander Horvath with how bad their running game is, but you can see there he's been pretty consistent in the receiving game. So he's so expensive. I'm not really sure I'll get to him, but he has a very good matchup. So in a game that I kind of said a game stack's possible, maybe if I play Horvath, maybe I'll play a game stack. But the quarterback I'm interested in, like I said, not many cheap quarterbacks. So Plummer, I wish the price was a little bit cheaper. If he was at like 7,000, 7.2, I'd probably have a lot of him. But he's had 35 and 42 attempts in his 2 games as a starter. As a team, Purdue's throwing for 304 passing yards per game. They can throw. Purdue's original quarterback, Aiden O'Connell, is out for the year, I believe, getting surgery. So Plummer's the guy. He's been good when he has been playing. He has some stackable wide receiving options. Rondale Moore has to be the guy at 6.8. I'd imagine he's going to be very high owned. I'm not good, and I don't really try to project ownership all that often because it's just not something I'm good at. But I'd imagine he's be highly owned because the price doesn't really make sense. He has 22 catches in 2 games he's played this year. He's out-targeted Bell by 13 targets in the 2 games they've shared the field, so he's definitely the alpha. But Bell can still get his, man. I mean, Bell's had 30-plus in 3 of his last 5. So if you're trying to be contrarian, you could go with, because I think Moore's the better player. He has the better price. He sees more opportunities, but that would make Bell very contrarian, and he's had 30-plus in 3 of his last 5, like I mentioned. So not the worst contrarian play. I'll have a lot of Moore. Anyone below that, Milton Wright isn't seeing that many targets with Moore back, but decent cheap option if you really need one. All right, Syracuse versus Notre Dame. I'm probably going to end up betting Purdue -2, by the way. I haven't got to the window with it. They're still playing. They're still playing for something, This Nebraska team, I just think they suck. So I don't know. These 2 teams are pretty close, but I'll probably end up betting Purdue. Not something I'm super confident in. All right, Syracuse versus Notre Dame. I want to point out how bad Syracuse is. They have a -2,000 total yardage margin on the season. I think Kansas is second worst with 1,600, so they're like 400 yards worse than any other team in the country. They've been brutal. If I'm targeting anybody offensively, Culpepper at quarterback is one of the guys I mentioned who's a very cheap quarterback. Could he pay off his price? Absolutely. Could he get 16 points? Yeah, it could certainly happen, but I think it's just as likely, if not more likely, that he gets 4 points. Taj Harris at 5.7. You could possibly play him. The way to beat Notre Dame's defense, the corners are okay, but the rest of the defense is excellent everywhere else except for corner. And Taj Harris had 13 catches for 146 yards and 1 touchdown last game. He had 20 targets in that game. 20 targets his last time out. He has double-digit fantasy points in 5 of his last 7 games, but he did have 2 duds in there. So we have a question mark, but they've been playing musical chairs at the quarterback position, so maybe that's what the duds are due to now. All right. As far as Notre Dame, Notre Dame's not usually someone who really likes to run up the score here, so they should be able to score a fair amount and get up to a comfortable lead, but I'm not really sure Ian Book's going to throw the ball all that much in this one. He could, of course, rush for a few. At 9.3 is not my favorite option. I think he's a little bit too expensive, but he's fine. Kyron Williams would be a smash play, but this Syracuse rush defense isn't good. They have a number 100 rush defense, allowing 201 yards per game. They allow 31 points per game in total. So Kyron Williams would be fine, but like I said, they might take their gas off the pedal a little bit. It's just a question of whether or not Williams has 3 touchdowns. He was a little bit banged up last week, although he looked fine. He looked completely healthy. So maybe they give him more of a rest here, which would make Sebo, Flemister, and Chris Tyree options. I don't really think Flemister is an option at that price. Maybe you disagree. Chris Tyree only saw 2 carries last game, but he saw 17 the week before that. I played a little bit of him. I played him in game stack and it didn't work out, but I'd imagine he sees some work here, and he was a very high 4-star recruit with long speed, so he could get one. I'm not really targeting Notre Dame's pass catching options. They have some cheap ones you could throw up as a lineup filler. McKinley's the one guy, then probably Skoranek, then Avery Davis and Meyer are all fine. Okay, Florida versus Tennessee. I want to point out Kyle Pitts has 11 touchdowns in 6 games he's played this year. That's very impressive. At 7.8K, he's expensive, but if you can pay up for him, you could do worse. Doesn't exactly see as many targets as you would like to see for somebody I'm paying up for at 7.8. It's fair to question whether or not Florida is just kind of an anomaly with how efficient their offense has been, but I still don't love paying up that much of a price when I could get other guys who have the same price but see way more targets and are almost as effective, if not more. So in general, I usually don't end up playing very much Florida for that reason. Kadarius Toney has been fantastic this year, but same thing with the targets. He's seen targets of 7, 6, and 3 in his last 3 games. I don't know if I can pay up for that at 6.7. When more is only $100 more. The run game, Tennessee actually has a decent rush defense. They're only allowing 3.9 yards per rush. They are allowing 243 pass yards per game, however. So if you're targeting something, it would be the pass game. I mean, Kyle Trask, front runner for Heisman, most likely at this point. Sure, if you can pay up for him, don't hate it. I don't think I'll have that much of him this week, as I mentioned. Anyone below that, I think I like the price of Shorter the best. He has seen decent targets over the last couple of games at 3.8K. He hasn't done a whole lot, but I think he's a little bit too cheap at 3.8. All right, Tennessee. Florida's defense isn't great. They're not bad, but they're definitely not great. I think they have some options I may play here. It sounds like Harrison Bailey's going to get the start. The talented freshman, he's only 4.5K. We haven't seen much from him, so it's difficult to tell how great he is. He's a pro-style quarterback, only 0 touchdowns and 2 interceptions on the year. Doesn't look fantastic. Not exactly a game he's set up for a whole lot of success in here, but Tennessee's not a bad team. Florida's a good team, but Tennessee, I wouldn't say they're bad. They're another one of those teams it's fair to question whether or not they've given up on the year. So Harrison Bailey is a very ballsy play, but maybe I'll throw him in a lineup or two just to see what happens. At the wide receiver position, Josh Palmer is okay. He's their target leader, but he hasn't really done much over the last few weeks. You see 1, 4, and 2, and 3 of his last 4 games, so I wouldn't go crazy, but Palmer's the guy if you're looking that way. Eric Gray is their top guy in his last 3 non-Alabama games. He has 128, 123, and 173 yards. He has 850 yards on 154 touches this year and has accounted for 35.8% of the Volunteers' offensive production. So Eric Gray is pretty much their offense at this point, and, Florida struggles to tackle running back. So mild interest in Eric Gray here. Mild interest. I'm not going to go crazy, but, he's been very productive. It's hard to ignore. All right, as far as West Virginia, Iowa State, not a game I'm very interested in, so I won't spend too much time on this one. Iowa State is looking for their first conference championship in 108 years, so they should be playing hard here. I think this is a pretty good game, actually. West Virginia hasn't played in about 3 weeks. I actually bet West Virginia 0.7, and then I found out they had some COVID stuff going on, so I'm not sure I'd recommend that bet at this point, but I just think it'll be a tight game, 2 well-coached teams, probably low scoring. The under is 8-0 in West Virginia's last 8 games as an underdog. They like to play games close. And the under has hit in 9 of West Virginia's last 13 games overall. All right, Iowa State defensively, they're only allowing 3.2 yards per rush. And what West Virginia likes to do is slam Letty Brown into the line of scrimmage. So I don't really see how you can get to Letty Brown at 8,000 in that matchup. I guess you could say his opportunities are fantastic, and you wouldn't be wrong. And he's been very consistent. So I would think that would be more of a cash game play. It's hard to argue. Volume is king in fantasy, so it's hard to argue with that. But maybe the queen and whatnot disagree, or maybe I'm just the jester. Who knows? Anyway, Jarrett Doege, he's been okay and he's somewhat cheap, but Iowa State has pretty good defense, so 6.2. I don't hate it if you're going with him as your super flex, but the volume's not fantastic. He's playing good defense. As far as wide receivers, Wright is their guy at 5,000, Winston Wright, but him, Ford Wheaton, and Simmons all see some targets. They kind of split it between them, so going against a good defense, I'm not really sure why that would be what you're targeting. If anybody, I'd go Wright. All right, as far as Iowa State, Brock Purdy, 7,000. He's okay. He seems to be a lock for 20 points each week, but West Virginia has a good defense. West Virginia actually has the number 1 pass defense in the country, only allowing 161 yards per game. They've had a few games canceled or postponed or whatever they're calling it nowadays, but still, they're pretty nasty. They have a really good rush defense as well. They're only allowing 3.3 yards per rush, which is weird because they don't have a defensive coordinator. I didn't know that until I was researching the game this week. I don't know. West Virginia just doesn't have a defensive coordinator, and they have a stellar defense. I went from 3rd worst defense in the Big 12 to the best. It's weird stuff. Anyway, so Breece Hall's expensive, but going against a really good rush defense, he's been a monster this year, so it's really hard to argue with him. I would be surprised if he got 30 plus in this matchup. I'll say that. West Virginia has a good defense, but wouldn't shock me because he's fantastic. As far as the wide receiving options go, I played Xavier Hutchinson last week, and he dropped a total egg, which is weird because he's been pretty consistent. He's had 2 duds. Other than that, very consistent. So Sean Shaw had a very good game, but he only saw 5 targets. This is a guy I was high on going into the year, and then I played him, and he was bad, and then I hopped off. And then when I play Hutchinson, Sean Shaw goes off. So I don't really think you want to be targeting their wide receivers. It is worth mentioning Tariq Milton finally returned to the field last week at 3.7K. He's probably too cheap. He did see 6 catches for 32 yards. I did play him as a punt option since he was only 3.5K. But again, I think all 3 of these guys are going to split work. Probably, I guess, their best fantasy wide receiver is their tight end, Charlie Kolar. Been very consistent. You can see here over 10 fantasy points in pretty much every single game. All right, Iowa versus Illinois. I see a lot of people on Iowa this week, and originally I was leaning that way, but I'm not so sure anymore. I didn't end up betting it. Illinois has been playing better football as of late. To highlight that, I know it's not perfect, but this is what you call MMA math in the UFC community. But they both played Nebraska, and Illinois beat them. I believe it was 41-23. Beat them somewhat convincingly, and Iowa only beat them 26-20. So I don't think this Illinois team is bad. I don't really expect them to get blown out by Iowa, I guess. However, what is concerning is Iowa does average 4.6 yards per rush. They have a pretty good rushing offense, whereas Illinois struggles to stop the rush. Number 94 rush defense at 4.7 yards per carry, and they're also not good against the pass, number 89 pass defense. So apparently they don't have a very good defense. As far as Iowa goes, like I said, Petrus has been really bad. He's been getting like 10 fantasy points per game. He's been missing some pretty easy throws, so at 5.5, I'm not interested. The volume's not great either. If I had to play a wide receiver, I'd play Amir Smith-Marset. He has home run, playability, good speed. He was, suspended, I think, for a game, but he's back, and his numbers haven't been great, and his volume's never been great, but nobody would be surprised if he took a 50-yarder to the house against Illinois. Tyler Goodson has been the workhorse back lately. In his last 3 games, he has seen 20 carries, 20 carries, and then 30 carries. You would imagine Illinois would just stack the box against them. And I think Illinois is a pretty well-coached team with Lovie Smith, so I think their game plan might be decent in this one and just stack the box. And I'm not sure if Goodson will go nuclear in this matchup, but at 7.4K, you can make an argument that he should be even more expensive in this one. So, long way of saying I think he's okay. He's fine. Sargent has been tearing it up as his backup, but Sargent mainly gets looks when the game is out of hand. Goodson's their clear bell cow. You can see here, like Penn State, they were up 20, so he came in. Minnesota, they were up 28, so he came in. Michigan State, they were up 42, so he came in. And Nebraska, it was a 6-point game, so we only saw 5 carries. However, he's getting a touchdown in every single freaking game, except Northwestern has a fantastic rush defense. So, in a game that some people think they might blow Illinois out, Sargent at 4.8K isn't the worst play in the world, I'll say that. But Goodson's definitely the higher price back for a very good reason. Okay. Illinois side of things, Illinois is second in the Big Ten with 22.4 rushing yards per game. They're actually a very good physical rushing team. The issue is Iowa ranks third in rush defense. They only allow 109.3 rushing yards per game. And they only allow 2.8 yards per rush, which is fantastic for Iowa. So I think Chase Brown sees enough opportunities at 5.3. He's not necessarily out of play, but obviously you can't be super excited about playing him against only 2.8 yards per rush. So Chase Brown has kind of emerged as the lead back the last 2 games. He has had carries of 17 and 26, surpassing Mike Epstein. So with that kind of volume in a game Illinois probably wants to make ugly, Chase Brown could see a lot of work in this one. So maybe. No interest in the quarterback. Brandon Peters should be back as the starter, but he hasn't been very good this year. He's cheap, has some rushing ability, but it's not great. The Immortal Baby, Josh Immortal Baby, I can't say it. Immortal Baby, we'll stick with that, is their top wide receiver, but the volume has never been great, and the stats have not been fantastic. So I don't know how much of him I'll play. The price is okay. If you need a punt option, maybe Daniel Barker. He has seen a fair amount of targets. He's done not much with them, but he sees a fair amount of targets, so he's got that going for him if you really need somebody. All right, Indiana versus Wisconsin. So big news in this one. Indiana will be without their star quarterback, Michael Penix Jr., and insert Jack Tuttle. Jack Tuttle is a 4-star recruit. I believe he was with Utah and then transferred. He was actually recruited by Wisconsin. So we don't know what we're going to get from Jack Tuttle. He really hasn't played much in college football action. So very difficult one to cap. What we do know is that Wisconsin has a good defense. They're better against the rush, number 2 rush defense, and the number 55 pass defense. And they did lose one of their top cornerbacks, a guy by the name of Wild Goose. Cool name, Wild Goose. But he decided to opt out to go to the NFL. So maybe Indiana can throw the ball. That puts a lot on Jack Tuttle's shoulders here against Wisconsin. But they have really good wide receivers. I mean, Freifogel and Fillier are 2 of the better wide receivers you're going to find, especially in the Big Ten. And Hendershot's a darn good tight end. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that Tuttle puts up like 200 yards. But, I'm not necessarily going to bank on that. I think if I'm banking on anything, it might be playing Fillier, who's a complete target hog at 4.4. Freifogel, a 6.5, that might be too expensive against Wisconsin. He has been a beast, but then last time out, he only saw 2 targets, which is a bit concerning. So you might think of Indiana as a rushing team because Stevie Scott's had some decent games. However, there are actually only 9 teams in America that are rushing for fewer yards per game than Indiana is. They have only 102 yards per game on the ground, and they've been doing so at only 3 yards per rush, which is only slightly better than teams like Kansas, UMass, and Mississippi State. So, Okay. Wisconsin. I have interest in their running back, Jalen Berger. He had 15 and 93 against a very good Northwestern rush defense last time out. He's seen 15 carries in each game that he's played. I believe he missed one due to COVID. And he didn't start one of those games. I'm not sure he started the last game either, but he was definitely their lead ball carrier. He seems to be emerging as their lead back. He's not like firmly entrenched as their lead back, but if it's going to be anyone this year, the money has to be on Berger. So I'm going to take a little swing here. You know, Indiana has a pretty good defense overall, but they are allowing 4 yards per carry, which is a good rush defense, but it's not fantastic. Wisconsin has gone 5 straight outings without a 100-yard rusher, and you'd have to go back to 2008 to find a stretch this long. I mean, this team is going to run the football. We know what they're going to do. We know what they want to do. So it's only a matter of time before that streak gets broken. I'm gonna have a few shares of Berger to find out if it's going to be him. Regarding Tuttle, so he was a 4-star recruit out of high school, nationally ranked as the number 4 pro-style quarterback by Rivals and number 5 by 247. So he was fairly touted, and I've heard some decent quotes about him. So maybe he's okay in this one. Anyway, off topic. Groshek at 4.4 would be the second back I would play. I'm not going to play that much of him, but he does have 4 catches in each game and 20 carries on the year, so he should see some workload. Not really any interest in Graham Mertz because they're not going to throw the ball that much. He had that one absolutely fantastic game and then 2 games where he combined for 23 points. So not really something you're looking for. In the wide receiver position, no thank you. Okay. Oh, that line, by the way, opened at 9.5. I think it's at 14 now. I would guess that's due to the Penix news. I don't really have confidence in Wisconsin to blow out anybody. I don't think Indiana's exactly a world beater, and I like them, so I don't know if I want to call them a fraudulent top 10 team, but certainly not something a team I want to throw my money at too much with a backup quarterback. So I ended up laying off that one. Okay, Boston College versus Virginia. This is a game I think is sneaky. I'll definitely have some game stacks, and if not full game stacks, I'll definitely have a lot of some of these players here. In a slate where pricing is very difficult, I think we have some fantastic pricing here. My one note is that you're going to want to check the weather if you're going to own this game, because it doesn't look great. It doesn't look terrible. Last I checked was yesterday, so I did all these game notes yesterday, so some of the numbers are slightly off by now. It's because I put this together yesterday and had time to record it today. Anyway, last I checked, there were winds of 12 miles per hour and a 68% chance of rain forecasted, and it was somewhat cold. I think it was like 47. So not fantastic, not terrible. But I would check that to see if it gets any worse. Anyway, I'm probably going to take the over. It's not that high. I forgot what it was at, 52? But not that high at all. And both teams are better offensively than they are defensively, so I'm not really sure what's going on here. Let's look at Boston College first. Phil Jerkovic at 6.6K. Obviously, the concern is that he injured his knee. He's probable. I expect him to play. It sounds like he's going to play. He's been practicing. And he's been pretty consistent. You know, I think he left that Louisville game injured. But before that, he had 21, 15, 23, 23, 30, 23, 27. You know, just game log watching. But he's been fine. And he has a very good matchup here against Virginia defense that's better against the rush. 3.7 yards per rush allowed at 142 yards per game. However, they're not good against the pass. Like, they're clearly a pass funneling team. They're number 115 in the country against the pass at 289 yards per game. They've allowed 275 yards or more in 6 of their 8 games that they played. So just a pretty awful performance so far in the pass defense. So if I'm pairing Jerkovic with anyone, I'll have a ton of Zay Flowers this week. In his last 4 games, he's seen targets of 10, 10, 12, and 8. He's been pretty consistent. He has double digits fantasy points in every game except for 1, and he's had a few monster games thrown in there as well. Very speedy guy. He could hit him deep, and even if he doesn't have a good game, I mean, he's been pretty much a lot for double digits. So a dud from him at 5.2K would be double digits. I like that. Anyone below that, I think Hunter Long, their tight end, is who you would look to. Seems to be the second most targeted guy. He's really fallen off a cliff lately he had a hot start. You can see there he's been in single digits in 3 of his last 4, but pretty good matchup here. Okay. The running game, like I said, I'm mostly targeting the passing game. David Bailey is pretty cheap at 4.9, but he has some injuries, and this team is awful run blocking. So if he's a go, I think he's okay, but more looking at the pass game. Okay, Virginia. Brennan Armstrong, the quarterback, has been a lock, pretty much a lock for like 23 plus fantasy points per game when he plays. He's like between 23 and 33 fantasy points, it seems like. And he's a dual threat quarterback, which I really like. So at 8.2, going against a Boston College defense that is beatable. They are number 75 against the pass, allowing 241 yards per game. And they're number 63 against the rush with 163 and 4.6 yards per carry allowed. So they're beatable everywhere, and Armstrong likes to do it all. So I don't love the stacking options is the thing. Lavelle Davis is probably the top wide receiving option. Big, tall, freshman, red zone target. Double-digit fantasy points in 4 of his 5 games. He's a red zone guy. He has only gone over 100 yards once, and that was 101. So not really sure if he's a safe bet to get the 100-yard bonus. He only has 2 targets. Had 2 targets in his last game. Not really something you want to see. So I'm not sure I'll pay up there. Probably if I'm owning anybody here, it would be Tony Poljan at 4.5. He does have double digits in 5 of his last 7 games, and he does actually see 47 targets this year, which is pretty good for a tight end. So he's somewhat touchdown dependent, but he's been actually kind of consistent at 4.5. You know, kind of similar to Charlie Kohler, who I was talking about earlier, except he had that one dud, so not as consistent. But he's been pretty decent. So I definitely don't hate Poljan as a lineup filler. As far as the running backs, Tualapapa really hasn't been seeing the workload to get me that interested. I guess as a punt option, you could do a lot worse with a starting running back. Simpson has been taking away some carries. Walker hasn't been seeing as many carries as some people expected to. Simpson's been by far the more effective back, and he looks like he's a receiving threat as well. So, 3.7 if you need a lineup filler who doesn't have a great workload, but has a game that I personally kind of want to target. That's not the worst thing in the world. Billy Kemp, I'm not sure why he's still listed as a running back. Same with Aina Smith. I don't know if DraftKings just is incapable of changing their positions all year. It's kind of weird, but Billy Kemp sees a lot of targets, and he's a short yardage guy. So maybe in cash or something, but the price isn't fantastic. All right, Vanderbilt versus Georgia. I'm not going to spend much time on Vanderbilt's side of things. I wouldn't target them in the running game in a game they're supposed to get smashed. Ken Seals at 4.7. Georgia's defense has been susceptible this year, but I think they're getting healthier. And they've looked better the last 2 weeks, both offensively and defensively. So I don't know. If I play anybody, it'd be their wide receivers, Pierce and Cam Johnson, 4.4 and 3.8. I've played these guys here and there as a lineup filler, and they've been fine. Cam Johnson's the better of the two, and I think he's priced appropriately. They're okay lineup fillers. Not really much to say. All right, Georgia. They have JT Daniels as their quarterback, and their offense has completely turned it around. I still have some note of caution. I really think they've turned it around, but they've been so bad for most of the year that I don't know if we can just expect them to be elite going forward. However, you don't really need to be elite going against Vanderbilt, because their defense stinks. They have the number 119 pass defense, allowing 292 yards per game, and their rush defense also is no good, 188 rush yards per game, and that's allowed at a 5.7 yards per carry clip, which is awful. JT Daniels is too expensive for my liking at $9,000. Could he have a big game? He's playing Vanderbilt. Of course he could. And he has decent stacking options, but the pricing isn't great. Kyrus Jackson was the number 1 guy for most of this year. However, in each of the last 2 games when Daniels has been playing, he's been out-targeted by Pickens and Burton. I do think Pickens is the number 1 guy. Got off to a very slow start. Apparently he was kind of injured. Who knows? But he's looked better as of late. At 6.3K, again, I don't love the price, but it's a good matchup. Burton at 5,000 probably has the best price here. He had that one huge blow-up game when Daniels first came in. Let's see what he had. 197 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then he went back to not doing much last week, but his targets were okay. So I think he'll still see decent targets going forward, but I don't know. It's fine at 5,000. I think he has some decent upside there. Running back position, I will own a fair amount of Zamir White. I think he's too cheap. He has 20 plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games. He had 1 dud in there, however. I think we'd all be surprised if he has a dud against Vanderbilt. The carries are a question mark. He only has 7, 11, and 13 in his last 3 games, which is obviously a huge question mark. But against Vanderbilt, he shouldn't need a ton of carries to do damage. The backup running backs in a game they're supposed to smash. I wish James Cook was a little bit cheaper at 5.k. I would play more of him, 5.5k. Kenny McIntosh is decent. They kind of had a blowout last week and he didn't do much, so buyer beware. All right, Stanford versus Washington. Kind of a funny one here. Stanford has no home right now because I'm in California. It's been really weird with COVID going on and whatnot, but they're not allowed to play football right now, so technically. So they're in Seattle, homeless in Seattle. Not homeless, but they're practicing. It sounds like they actually had a decent week of practice from when I was reading the quotes. I wouldn't be super concerned about it. But this Washington defense is nasty, man. They have the number 3 pass defense at only 162 yards per game. And when you watch them, they're fun. If you haven't watched them, watch the secondary. Of course, I'm going to say that. Maybe they'll get lit up this week, but I've been watching them defensively, and I really, really love the way they play football, and I love the way their corners play. Very physical. Anyway, Stanford, Weddington's come back at the wide receiving position, and he has 14 catches for 148 yards and no touchdowns in 2 games. However, the targets get pretty evenly split between him, Wilson, and Fehoko, and Fajoko's the big play guy. So with Fehoko being the cheapest guy, he's the big play guy. He hasn't had a great game yet, and he has a very tough matchup. I may have a share of him just in case. I don't know. I think they're playing a good Washington defense, but in a game where they might be kind of shut down, maybe they'll hit a big play or 2. I don't know. I think Fajoko's decent, but I wouldn't really target these guys too much. Weddington has seen a lot of catches in both games he's played, so maybe a cash option, but I feel like there's probably better cash options going against Washington. And Davis Mills, like I said, tough matchup. You can run on this Washington team. They've had some games where they've given up some decent ones. Oh, Fajoko's targets, by the way, 7, 9, and 7 in his 3 games, so decent target share. Anyway, I don't know. Jones, you can run the ball in Washington, but he's already had 1 dud, and I just think it's hard to get excited in a matchup against Washington. I think Washington should roll them, even though their offense hasn't been great. Stanford has a very bad rush defense, so I am interested in Washington. Stanford has the number 118 rush defense, allowing 229 yards per game at a 5.7 yards per rush clip. That's awful. The problem is there's a timeshare with Washington. Richard Newton is the goal line back in a game that they should score touchdowns. I would have ownership interest, but he didn't play last game, and I haven't seen any reliable news sources, reliable news about if he's going to play or not. So I don't know if I can play him. With that being the case, if he does play, who knows? So that means if he doesn't play, if I know for sure he's not going to play, Pleasant and McGrew, I'll have some of them. I guess McGrew is cheaper, so maybe I'll just go McGrew. They pretty evenly split the carries. Pleasant has seen slightly more, which is a surprise. I don't know if it's a pleasant surprise. But he's been slightly better so far and seen slightly more rushes. So I think either one's fine against that terrible rush defense. All right, as far as the receivers go, Cade Otton, the tight end, has gone nuclear the last 2 games. He has 15 catches for 208 yards and 3 touchdowns. And he's playing a bad Stanford defense, so hello. Other than that, I don't really see how you could pay up for anybody. I think Puka Nacua is the next guy. They've really had some trouble getting him the ball. Dylan Morris has looked really bad back there so far this year, in my opinion. I think Puka Nacua is very talented, and I think he has some high upside in general, but I don't think high upside necessarily. with Dylan Morris at quarterback in this game. So if I'm paying for somebody, I think Cade option is a decent choice. Okay, we made it to the last game. Georgia Tech versus NC State. So I would. I want to note that NC State has a number 98 pass defense, allowing 265 yards per game. So some ownership interest in Jeff Sims at 7.3, but he's not quite as cheap as I would like him to be. So not a cross-off, but decent. He's had some really bad games, but those were against Notre Dame and Clemson. And other than that, he's been pretty good. Not as many points against Syracuse as we would expect, but he's been pretty good. He had 30 points his last time out. He's kind of a boomer bust guy, and the volume's not really fantastic, but he does run the ball as well. NC State, I wouldn't stack him with anybody, by the way. His wide receivers are all over the place. I guess I would go with Camp. Seems to kind of be emerging, if I had to. Okay, running back's interesting. So NC State they've allowed 3.9 yards per rush, which seems pretty good, and they've looked much better of late, but those have been against either bad or mediocre teams, so I kind of think they're not quite as good as that number shows. And Georgia Tech has a pretty good running game. They ran for 377 yards against Duke last week, and that was actually the best offensive performance in the Jeff Collins era. So whether or not that continues, I don't know. I think they're improving. I think they have some talent, but I don't know if it's really reliable week to week. So it's kind of a toss-up. So where it gets interesting is Jahmyr Gibbs, their star freshman running back, left last game with injury. So again, we monitor whether he's going to be back or not. We have no reliable news as of now. Since he didn't return last week, I guess I would lean towards he doesn't play, but that's pure speculation. Which means I would be interested in Jordan Mason. And even if Gibbs does play, I think Mason is too cheap. I think Mason's a very, very good back. He's dealt with a lot of injuries this year, but he's back. He shouldn't be that cheap, especially if Gibbs doesn't play. I would play a ton of Mason. However, so Mason had 21. Let me finish that. Mason had 21 carries for 105 yards last week. He was sharing carries a little bit with Gibbs, even though Gibbs was the 1A. However, I was just ready to put Mason in like all my lineups. Him and Berger were my two most owned running backs. Again, I haven't said that many lineups, but yeah. And like the last article, so I go through and I pull up like every article I can find on all the games for all the slates. Mostly I skim them over. I think it was the last one on Georgia Tech. I didn't see this anywhere, and it's like the last paragraph. Like I swear, I almost had just exited out of it. And I found a gem that I'm glad I found. It said that Mason also left. I didn't see this. He left the game against Duke in the fourth quarter after he says he was tackled awkwardly and did not return. Now, they ended up winning that game by about 20, but his backup did have, I think it was Smith came in, and he had like 66 yards, so 60 yards on 5 carries. So I don't know how healthy Mason's going to be. Jeff Collins was super tight-lipped about it when I saw his quote. He's not offering anything about Jordan Mason, not offering anything about Gibbs. There's a chance Mason doesn't play, and there's a chance if he does play, he's hobbled. So I'm still going to play some of him, but I was going to play a lot of him, and now I'm not so sure. I think that's a red flag. Again, I'm not saying I have a ton of inside information. I'm just saying I didn't see that information anywhere, and I stumbled upon it on the last paragraph of the last article I was looking at. So there's not much info in it. It sounds like it's a wild card because Collins isn't telling us. Okay, anyway. So if he doesn't play, hold it till later. If he doesn't play, and if Gibbs doesn't play either, Smith would be a good play. I think the very sneaky play, and the one I would probably go to, is Jamius Griffin. It sounds like he was supposed to be available last game, but didn't see action. Maybe he was still injured. I guess that makes it another wild card, but he's been pretty good when he does play. I guess the safer option would just be go to Smith if they were both out, but I think either one of those guys are fine. Maybe Griffin just because he's cheaper. Okay, last but not least, NC State. Hockman has had 27 plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 starts, but he had one huge dud in there. That was against Liberty. Of course, that was like the one time I played him. He laid that dud. Anyway, So he's fine. He's going against a Georgia Tech defense that is bad, really bad. 38.9 points per game allowed. They have they allow 185 rush yards per game. And they're even worse against the pass. They allow 274 yards per game. That's number 106 in the country. In general, I think NC State should be just kind of slightly better just about everywhere in this matchup. Is it possible another Georgia Tech offensive explosion happens? Maybe. But in general, I think NC State should be able to score here against that bad defense. I think Hockman at 7.4 is okay. I am probably not stacking him, but Emezi has double digits in 5 of his last 6. However, he has only gone over 100 yards once this year. He's just a tough guy to read. Like, I've played him every now and then. Every time I play him, he has a dud. Yeah, see, I played him against Liberty, and that was like his worst game in his last 4. It's just, I don't know, but I think he's probably their top guy. However, I'm going to have some Thayer Thomas at 5.9K. You see, he had 39 points and then 40 points. He put up a 40 burger, almost, in 2 of his last 3 games. And his target share has just been huge. He's like a little slot guy. This is surprising. It was against FSU and it was against Syracuse, 2 bad teams, but Georgia Tech is not a great team either. I don't know why he dropped a dud against Liberty. I didn't see that game. I don't know if he didn't play. I would probably look into that before I actually insert him into my lineup. Because if he played and got a dud, I mean, I guess either way, like he's kind of boom or bust, which isn't really how you would think of Thayer Thomas. He seems just like a slot guy who gets some work. So I thought he's worth mentioning in a game that might be sneaky to own. I'm not really sure how many people are going to want to own that game. All right. As far as a positional overview, I mean, I'm not going to go over every single person. The quarterbacks are really expensive. If I'm paying up, I might pay all the way up to Fields. Probably won't do it that often. Ellinger at 9.1, I'll have some. Armstrong at 8.2. Plummer at 7.9. Maybe Hockman at 7.4. Maybe Sims. Again, maybe like 1 share of Adrian Martinez just to get cute. Spencer Sanders at 6.8. I'll have some of him. And yeah, any other people I mentioned but looked over right here. As far as running backs, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to pay up at running back this week. My most owned running backs will probably be Berger. Again, I was going to be Mason. I haven't quite decided how to change up my lineups or pivot yet. I think there's a lot of decent options in the mid-range. Spiller, Goodson, Gray, if I'm paying up, that might be as high as I'm able to get. I don't really know if anybody up here is worth paying up for. I do think Kyron Williams should be the most expensive going against Syracuse. And then anybody else I mentioned. So I'm not really prioritizing running back this week, it seems like. In such a big slate, it's kind of hard to prioritize anything. Probably just going to start with the value wide receivers. I like Rondell Moore. I like Zay Flowers. I like Chris Olave. And anybody else I mentioned. You know, Tylen Wallace is great, obviously, but expensive. So, and anybody else I mentioned in this video. So those are kind of the guys that are popping up in my head. I've only set a lineup or 2, and that's where I started my lineups. But yeah, as far as bets, I did bet Buffalo minus 11.5, which I'm not sure if I should have done that or not, because apparently it's the largest home dog Ohio has been since like 2005. But I just think this Buffalo team's really good. They're well coached. I bet them last week, and it worked out nice and well. So maybe it's recency bias. But they run the ball phenomenally well, record-breakingly well. And Ohio has been terrible against the rush. And they played 3 games, and 2 of those against Akron and Bowling Green, 2 of the worst teams in college football, who conveniently are playing this week, so we can find out who's worse. But so yeah, if they can't stop the rush against those teams, I don't really see why they're going to stop the rush against Buffalo. So, and I think Buffalo has a better defense. So sure, I did bet Oklahoma minus 21.5 and Ohio State minus 23.5. I usually don't play favorites that big, but like I mentioned, the Ohio State one, I feel pretty good about that one. Just blowing out for style points Michigan State, and kind of a similar thing for Oklahoma. They've really been on a tear. They've really seemed to have turned it around, and they're playing a Baylor team that I just have no confidence in. I don't think they're good at all this year. So I look for Oklahoma to kind of make a statement. They're not going to make the playoffs, but they think they have a chance, and I think they're going to try to play like it. Another big favorite, Alabama minus 28.5 against LSU. And I also played them minus 16.5 in the first half. Kind of a split bet on that one against LSU. I mean, LSU stinks, and Alabama is by far the best team in college football, in my opinion. I don't know if I'll say by far, but they're clearly. I took Arizona State minus 3 over UCLA. UCLA has surprisingly looked pretty darn good this season. But I just can't shake the feeling that Arizona State's a better football team, and I just can't trust that Chip Kelly's really turned it around. He's one of those coaches that just really seems like they've kind of stalled out, and there's not much going on. And maybe they played 4 good games, but it's a weird year, and eventually they're going to fall back down to earth. So I took Arizona State minus 3. As far as underdogs, I took Arkansas plus 3 over Missouri. Missouri's been a lot better this year than I expected. I mean, Arkansas has been too, but I just think Arkansas is a better football team, and they're catching points. I just think they're better mostly everywhere. West Virginia plus 7 against Iowa State. Like I said, there's some COVID issues going on. Not sure how I feel about that one now, but I'm on it. And what I should think would be a tight defensive matchup. And then I took Washington State plus 13 against USC. That game's actually on Sunday. I think Washington State's a pretty good football team. I think they're solid everywhere. I think Jaden Delore is supposed to play, their freshman quarterback. He's been pretty good. And USC has been very disappointing this year. They haven't really played good football. So I don't really see why they should be catching 2 touchdowns against a team that they haven't really played much better than so far this year. So maybe USC finally plays their ability, that's totally possible, but I'm not going to bank on that to happen. I'll believe it when I see it. All right, that wraps up this edition of the College Football Breakdown Show. Best of luck to you this week. It's a weird slate, I know. I'm probably going to end up playing a lot of afternoon slates, morning slate. No morning slates on DraftKings, but probably on FanDuel. Probably some alternative slates to try to get out of this crazy amount of games. But there's the information for you. I should have an article coming out. It should be out tomorrow morning, so I'll link this down below to the YouTube video, and I'll post that on Twitter, at YonkersCFB on Twitter. Go ahead and give me a follow. I try to tweet out stuff I'm thinking, and I tweet out, if you're looking for the DFS articles. I come out with a winners and losers article each week as well. So other than that, good luck, fellas.